Welcome, everyone. Good morning, or I suppose good afternoon for some of us. We're going to dive right in because we've got a lot to cover today. My name is Jody Roberts. I am part of Art and Climate Action, which is a collective of artists and arts professionals in the Bay Area. We really appreciate your joining us for season 2 of these virtual community meetings, which are organized with Galleries Commit based in New York. As people trickle in, if you could put your name and your home city into the chat, we'd love to get to know you just a little bit. And a heads up, we are recording this conversation and it will go up on our YouTube channel. So if you are more comfortable without video on, we totally understand, but we also love to see everyone's faces. Art and Climate Action and Galleries Commit are dedicated to helping colleagues in the art world understand the steps we need to take to build a sustainable art community, both locally and globally. Last season, we introduced a range of resources and tools that can make the transition to sustainable practices easier and more effective. But today, we're thrilled to hear from someone working full-time in the sustainability and art arena. Simone Paz is Associate Director of Sustainability at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. She's funded by the museum's Environmental Council, the first council of its kind in the US. And Simone is the first full-time employee at a major California museum hired specifically to enhance the building's climate impact holistically. That means going from working with facilities staff to improve the envelope on the building, to collaborating with curators, designers, educators to figure out ways to reduce emissions and waste as we go through daily activities, including research trips, shipping, public programs, and exhibition installation. In this role, Simone collaborates with MOCA's entire staff and the Environmental Council to develop and implement new climate conscious protocols and practices. She arrived at MOCA as a sustainability consultant. She holds a Master of Science in Environmental Studies, and she's an accredited lead green associate through the US Green Building Council. She's also a True Zero Waste advisor, and she has a California state certification in recycling and resource management. So I have no doubt that we are going to learn a lot from Simone today. And I will hand it over to her, but I just want to say thank you for being here to talk about an activity that's central to all of our work, planning exhibitions. We will save some time at the end for question and answers, so keep your questions and throw them into the chat at the end of Simone's talk, and we'll be sure to get to those. And if it's possible, if you could put your computer on mute while she's speaking, just so we don't have a lot of background noise, that would be fantastic. With that, take it away, Simone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Art and Climate Action and Galleries Commit, for having me here today. I also want to thank MOCA's Environmental Council, which was formed in 2020 by David Johnson and Haley Mellon, and I saw Haley here today. There's about 15 council members and advisors, including our museum director, Johanna Burton. And the council is focused on furthering the museum's work around climate conservation and environmental justice. And I want to thank all of you for being here. There's quite a crowd, so I'm really excited. As Jody mentioned, we'll have time for questions at the end, so please add your questions to the chat as I'm speaking. So I am excited to be talking about planning for sustainable exhibitions today, but there's one important point that I want to mention first, and this is very important. I just want to say that we are all still learning. I like to think about sustainability work as an experiment. And if it's an experiment, we can apply the scientific method. So we make observations, we do research, we form a hypothesis, we test and collect data, and we can modify the process as we gain knowledge, and we keep iterating until we achieve our intended results. And then when we make it an experiment, we don't have to get caught up in making it perfect or even getting it right. So we can just let go of expectations and begin. So with that, I am going to share my slides here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, as we're all aware, there are many environmental impacts to exhibitions. So, there are carbon emissions, there is water consumption, eutrophication, and toxicity. There are land and soil degradation impacts. There is air pollution and particulate matter. There are biodiversity impacts, human health and toxicity impacts, as well as a whole lot of waste. And there are multiple impacts along the entire life cycle of every material that we use in an exhibition. And that is from the extraction and manufacturing stage of the materials to the end of life of the materials. So, okay, so there are many considerations that can be integrated into a holistic, sustainable exhibition strategy. And this, I'm not going to go through everything here. I'm just going to kind of give a brief overview, but this includes carbon emissions reductions related to building energy use, artwork energy use, as well as emissions related to artwork production. We can also think about prioritizing low carbon shipping methods, such as sea freight, road freight, or even train freight versus air freight. Also minimizing travel, including flights, accommodations, and car travel, as well as considerations of how to minimize the life cycle impacts of materials. And another thing to think about is all of the events and food that are related to the exhibition, as well as paper usage, including book printing and other marketing materials, as well as minimizing waste generated during the construction and deinstallation. So it's important to measure the emissions and impacts of these areas during the exhibition or after it closes. And often this happens after it closes. But more importantly, we really want to rethink every process related to our exhibitions from the beginning stages in order to reduce our impacts. So for those of you who have heard me discuss sustainable exhibitions previously, you will know that it is imperative to start at the concept and design phase in order to implement sustainable solutions effectively. So this is really about rethinking and redesigning every process related to your exhibitions. And we can consider exhibitions as a system and apply systems thinking through each stage of the exhibition process. And in order to do that, we first need to understand where the problem lies in the system. We do this by asking a lot of questions. And the main question we want to think about as we're applying the systems thinking to our exhibition is really, where are the greatest impacts? So this is a process of reevaluating your current practices, as well as looking at every area of an exhibition and questioning, can I do something different here? Or can I do something better? Again, this includes all the stages of the exhibition, from the design and the installation, openings, guest visits, all the way through to the end of the exhibition, including deinstallation. So one of the other questions we want to think about in the concept and design phase is, how can I shift my perspective to see alternative possibilities that I may not have seen previously? And in addition to that, thinking about how can all of the members of your team also shift their perspective? So it's really about applying the sustainability lens onto every process of the exhibition and really examining it and questioning what it is that you're doing and how you can do things differently. In the concept and design phase, we also want to think about design for disassembly, which is designing and planning for the end of the exhibition at the very beginning. So the way that we accomplish rethinking and redesigning our exhibitions is by working together. And many of you will know that I talk about collaboration a lot. Collaboration is one of the most important aspects of making exhibitions more sustainable. And that includes collaboration and partnerships with individuals and teams across your own organization, as well as those across the entire art and cultural sector. So the first, when starting this process and thinking about collaboration, the first question to consider is, who are your stakeholders in every area of the exhibition? I have a list here of some of the teams that would likely be involved, but this is certainly not an exhaustive list. So there's curators, and we think about curators for this specific exhibition, as well as the next one, the one after that, especially when we're sort of considering what can be saved, what can be reused, and how can the old exhibition spaces be designed into the new exhibition spaces. Artists, obviously, we want to include in this collaboration in the conversation. Registration team and shipping companies, and especially in terms of shipping and reducing emissions there. Exhibition production teams, as well as construction teams, including contractors, fabricators, installers, and suppliers. We can include operations or facilities teams, as well as development teams, especially if you're going to require additional funding for labor or materials recycling for the exhibition. And then also communications teams. So from the very beginning, really thinking about what is the story that you want to tell and how can you expand your impact with this project. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. I also have on here collectors and insurers, as they are certainly part of the conversation as well. So I want to talk about the term charrette here, and some of you may already know this. It is a concept that's used in the architecture and design industries, but I believe it's valid here because it is a truly collaborative process that draws on the expertise of all the participants in order to create a holistic view of sustainability for the exhibition. And I'll just quickly read the definition. It's a meeting in which all stakeholders in a project attempt to resolve conflicts and map solutions. And again, it doesn't have to only be used when there's conflicts, but really thinking about how to start from the very beginning, involving everyone to really create a map for sustainability for your exhibition. So the charrette is really about removing the silos at each stage of the exhibition process in order to integrate sustainability into every area. And during a charrette, there are some questions that we want to think about. First of all, what are we doing and why are we doing it? As well as how can we do it differently? And kind of going back to collaboration, one of the things that I find very helpful in a charrette and just in general, in terms of collaborating on sustainability measures, is thinking about using collaborative language. So, you know, we say, let's figure this out together, as opposed to directives about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, particularly related to sustainability. And then in the charrette process, you can also create a formal early stage plan that will identify your sustainability goals, as well as the strategy for implementation. And this plan or this document will be able to guide you through the exhibition stages. And again, you can continue working on it through all of the exhibition stages, but a charrette is a really great time to really kind of get that on paper and have it formalized. Another thing that you can think about in terms of what to do during a charrette is thinking about creating a one-sheet document for all of the stakeholders and their teams, not just the individuals that are involved in a charrette, but all of their teams. And this document is really a summary of the why and the how of your plan. And it's really there for everyone to understand what the goals and the implementation plan are throughout the entire exhibition. So there are some other important areas to consider in the planning phases. Communications is one of them. And as I mentioned before, communication is key to expanding the positive impact beyond what you do in your individual organization or in that specific exhibition. So when we're thinking about communications, one of the questions we want to consider, particularly in the very beginning stages, is how can you influence other organizations to do the same? So really thinking about the ways that you can shift the common narrative on how exhibitions are designed and produced. And along with that, thinking about, again, from the very beginning, can you create a policy or possibly publish a case study for this project? And if so, you're really going to need to plan for that in the beginning. The other thing we want to think about is, in terms of expanding your impact, is really how can you influence your vendors and suppliers and all of the individuals that you're working with on the exhibition in order to shift towards more sustainable practices. And ultimately, that's what we need, really. So, what you do in your exhibition and your projects is so important and it's so impactful. But thinking about really how we can influence all of the individuals and organizations, vendors, suppliers, everyone that we're working with towards more sustainable practices in order to expand that impact. So as I recommended previously, really bringing these vendors and suppliers into the charrette. And it's also an opportunity to provide education and resources for those that may not already be integrating sustainability into their work. And also providing that one sheet of all of the information, including your goals and plans for the exhibition. Back to planning stages, all of this is very important to really consider in the beginning because, sometimes it seems like we might have a lot of time when planning for exhibitions, but it goes quickly and there's always time constraints. So we really want to know exactly what we're doing from the very beginning and plan for anything that we're adding at the beginning stages. So metrics and reporting is also something we really want to think about in the beginning as well. So I know many of you have heard this, but I think it's worth repeating. You can't manage what you don't measure. And in order for us to understand how to reduce our impacts, either for this specific exhibition that we're working on or any other upcoming exhibitions and projects in the future, we really need to know what those impacts are. And we can't reduce them unless we know what they are. And that involves metrics. So we really need to know and understand what our goals are in the very beginning of the process in order to set targets for reductions. And again, going back to how the planning stages are key for sustainability process. So we also need to put the required data collection processes in place in the very beginning so that during all the exhibition stages, we can track our results for reporting. As I mentioned previously, it's possible to do this after the exhibition. However, it is much more efficient to implement these processes from the very beginning. And then, so the specific data you will collect is dependent on your specific goals, as well as how you plan to do your reporting. So one of the other things in terms of metrics and reporting, I also encourage tracking all of your challenges and learnings throughout the process, as well as sharing them, going back to communications. So this is really how we all learn and grow and overcome these challenges. And there's a lot of challenges, especially when we're just starting out on a sustainability journey, really working in all of these processes into exhibitions. There's a lot to learn and a lot to grow from. So I really recommend being able to think about how you can share that with your peers. So I'm also including some resources here that most of you probably already know, but I always want to give a shout out to our art and sustainability partners. So barter.art and MuseoCycle are excellent ways to find or donate materials for your exhibitions. Artists Commit supports climate impact reports for exhibitions. And our partners Art and Climate Action and Galleries Commit, who are here hosting us today, as well as the Gallery Climate Coalition and Key Futures that are a wealth of resources. So I am going to stop sharing my screen if I can. There is just one last thing that I wanted to say, and we can go into questions after. I know there was a lot of information here, so hopefully you got all of it. But one thing I want to say is that even if it's not perfect, or it might not even be possible to apply this process from the start to finish, I really want to encourage you to start somewhere, start anywhere. Find some intervention point in the exhibition process, work on creating an action plan, and continue to evolve the process through all of your exhibitions and projects. It's really just about doing it. So that's it.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Simone. We do have a couple questions coming in. David asked, please define what you mean by sustainability lens. What criteria do you include with this lens?
So thank you for that question. There are so many criteria, and there's a lot of ways of thinking about it. I think the best way to think about it in terms of exhibitions is really when you look at your exhibition, kind of as I mentioned, assessing and reevaluating the way you have done things in the past, as well as looking at every process in the exhibition and seeing what can I do differently here? What can I do different? So in terms of applying a lens, it's really just, being able to see differently, being able to see where the impacts are, what you're producing. And, there's a lot of areas, obviously, some of them I mentioned: carbon, shipping, waste, materials. So really just having an idea about all of the different areas that are possible to change the impact, and really seeing where those are applicable in your exhibition. I hope that makes sense.
Douglas asked, do you specifically plan for how members of the public become stakeholders and co-creators of meaning in relationship to the artworks and exhibits? And what happens to this meaning making in the process of the show? So I think the question is, you're working internally with the museum's team, but of course the museum is serving a broader public. And how do you bring them into the conversation as well?
This is a very important question, and I think there could probably be many, many talks specifically on this subject. I do think that really being able to even consider how you're going to be bringing in the community as well, you again need to start in the very beginning, thinking about, are there community partners that you can bring into the Charettes, that you can involve in the process, and really understanding what impacts are happening within your local community with, all of the individuals who will be coming to see the show, really thinking about how you can engage them. And though, maybe it's not appropriate to have them in the planning charrette, but really thinking about how to bring them into the conversation, I think is really beneficial as well.
Danielle, I think you have your hand up if you want to jump in.
Sorry, I was typing, but I was like, it's probably easier for me to say. First of all, thanks for the presentation. It was good to see other like-minded people who are thinking through this process. And I think that a lot of people in this in the chat in the room here kind of are in that same sentiment. But there are like some challenges that I wanted to understand if you've been able to address these or face these, and a lot of that is around the supply chain and the material part of it, because like there are a lot of incentives, especially in California, to address your building and waste energy use. Like that's a very achievable goal that maintenance and building folks can really address pretty quickly in exhibitions. But I find that the challenging areas are where, when you're trying to look at from artist conception, thinking about material acquisition and vendors, and then that shipping, because of the level of quantities or quantity of materials that you are asking for, a lot of times that's out of budget or unachievable. Have you been able to address that? Have you seen successes in that area? Like, how do you deal with that particular node?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. It is, I will say, it can be a bit of a rabbit hole. Really thinking about the life cycle impacts of materials. I think in the first place, you really want to go to your vendors and suppliers, and it's really about, in order to understand what the impacts are, from extraction to the end of life, you really need to do research and understand who the manufacturers are, and that really comes with going to your vendors and suppliers first. There are so many impacts that are related to materials. I think there's just a few things I'll mention, because this is another area where I could just talk for days and days, but really sort of, if you want to maybe choose a couple areas of materials and focus on those, it might be a little more manageable. But local materials sourcing is always one way to reduce impacts on materials. Thinking about low embodied carbon materials, so that will sometimes involve some research to just figure out what materials have produced less carbon during the extraction and manufacturing phases. And then in terms of materials, thinking about, can you use reused items or other salvaged items, because that minimizes and reduces the carbon impacts and other impacts as well. Thinking about low and no toxicity materials is very important, not only for human health, but also for ecosystem health. And minimizing materials use. So really thinking about, can you change some aspects of the design to really use less materials? Let's see, some of the other ideas we want to think about. And again, this really goes back to understanding who the manufacturers are, and where the suppliers and vendors are procuring the materials, thinking about where they're actually extracted, where they're actually being manufactured. And that can be a very broad area, and it can be difficult because supply chains are often very opaque. But just having that in mind and asking the questions, and this kind of goes back to expanding your impact with your suppliers and vendors, really asking them the questions, because they may not know, and giving them the opportunity to find out. I hope that answers your question.
From Laura, in the Charette process, what have you seen to be most successful so far? Are there certain teams from the museum or aspects of sustainability that people are responding to enthusiastically, or where are you finding points of resistance?
I will say any behavior change and process change can be challenging. I think I would say, everyone, all of us here and everyone at the museum that I work with, and probably all of your organizations, everyone wants to do their part in terms of climate change and really do as much as they can. I think the biggest challenges really come down to intensity of time. It takes additional time to really work on sustainability measures and to integrate them into your processes. Labor intensity, it often involves additional labor, and economic intensity or capital intensity. So not all the time, sometimes we can reduce costs, but sometimes we do need to increase costs to implement these measures. And so with that, I mean, that just sort of describes everything. And that really is where the challenges lie. Because again, it's not that people don't want to do the right thing, it's that it can be challenging in these areas. So, are there any other questions, Jody?
Just a few more. Can you offer examples of a museum that has successfully engaged its visitors in this process? I'm interested to hear different productive ways audiences have participated.
Just to clarify, I don't know who wrote that, but engage the visitors in the planning process?
Probably after, I'm guessing. Like once the exhibition is up.
Okay, so in terms of sustainability.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So there's a few, I don't have very specific examples that I can give you right now, but I would say one of the things that we're working on is really being able to communicate. So it goes back to communication, not only communicating before, during, but also at the exhibition. So how can you communicate what you have done to all of the visitors that are coming into the exhibition? So thinking about, wall text, and that's something that we're considering at MOCA as well, thinking about wall text. Is there any other ways that you can just give brief information about what you've done in this process? So, because I do think that visitors are very interested and giving them the opportunity to understand not only, if it's published in a climate impact report, but really on site. I think that really gives them an opportunity to engage.
Awesome. I'm going to cut to just one more. I know we're running short on time and people have busy mornings, but from Douglas, approaching exhibitions as experiments and tracking impacts is great. Is there a framework you use for developing full value proposition planning approaches to exhibits? You mentioned, for example, the one sheet, including both the intended impacts on the public and the unintended impacts on environmental and social systems.
So I would love it if there was a guide that had all of this already, printed exactly how to do that. As I mentioned, we're all still learning. So really, this is just a process of development where we're really, drawing on the insights of other organizations, other museums, how they're doing it, thinking about what their sustainability plans are, and kind of incorporating that into what we do. I wish I had something that I could direct you to that's just an overall how to do sustainable exhibitions. At this moment, that resource does not exist, but I hope that it does very soon. And again, I want to encourage everyone to if you start integrating sustainability into your exhibitions and processes, think about how you can share that information, creating case studies and guides for other organizations. So, but as of yet, I don't have that to share.
And if you had just like a quick set of, I don't know, 2 to 3 things that you would recommend for other teams at other museums in terms of reducing emissions, reducing waste, what have you noticed coming into a museum where almost across the board, every exhibition, this is an area that can be tackled?
That is okay. 2 to 3 areas. Let's see. It's so dependent on the specific, thinking about energy use, for example, it depends on the specific building. And does that organization own the building, or are they, are they leasing the building, such as in a gallery? So that in itself can be challenging. Thinking about other areas like shipping, I think planning in advance for shipping and being able to incorporate extended timeframes, especially with using ocean shipping or slower shipping methods. That's one way that you can definitely reduce. And I think pretty much everyone can do that. Let's see. In terms of waste, I think really planning in just the materials that you're using, as well as what I talked about, design for decommissioning and how you can either reuse them, recycle them, or donate them. Really kind of just thinking about what are all the inputs that you have and what will you do with them at the end. I think those are some areas that everyone can think about. I hope that's helpful.
No, I get it. It's a case by case. And thank you so much for being here and for the insights. We will follow up with, if you'd like, some recommendations for participants on this call in terms of other groups or resources that are available to sort of get this process started. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to Art and Climate Action and Galleries Commit with questions. And we do hold these meetings the first Friday of every month. So we will have lots more information coming down the line. Thank you so much, Simone, for being here. Thank you everyone for joining, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you all for joining.